This is the third lecture for chapter 5, and we've talked about in the other two the rules, the idea and rules for making dimensions. Now we want to look at how AutoCAD specifically does it. A couple of reminders that there's several components to adding dimensions. Or what you're trying to do is communicate information that someone could use your drawing to create the object. So you have to worry about the technique and what your dimensions look like. You've got to worry about what things to dimension and where to put them, and then there's multiple choices along those lines about how to dimensions things. There's more than one correct choice, but there's lots of choices that are correct. Like I said several times, the book does a good job of showing you what to point and click, but doesn't explain why it's doing it. So you're going to want to review. If you haven't watched the videos, watch the other two first. They're not all that long. I've got an explanation and examples. And then look over the summary of the dimensioning rules as you go through AutoCAD, learning how to do them, particularly in AutoCAD. So those are in Module 5. Of course, the summary of dimensioning rules are here. And keep in mind that the technicians that you might work with in a drafting department, the engineers, are worried about the design, and the drafters are worried about taking that design and put it in the right correct form. They spend 2 years studying and take multiple courses on how to dimension. Dimensioning is complicated. We're just giving you a rough introduction. These are some of the basic rules. Some of them conflict with each other, and that's why you have to make choices. But in terms of AutoCAD, the thing to remember is our software scales everything for us. That's one of the great things about it. When you're working on your model, it can be anything from a microchip to a house. So size doesn't really matter in terms of what will fit inside cyberspace. But when you go to print it out for someone to look at, then there's title blocks and things that go along with it, and there's your dimensions. Typically, in a more advanced course, what you would learn to do is to put your dimensions in what AutoCAD calls paper space, which is a fixed size. There's several different standard sizes that things are printed on. Some of them are a regular sheet, but of paper like you would take notes on. But there are many different sizes, but there's a limited number. And then you can adjust your dimensions to the paper and not the physical object. We're going to be dimensioning in object space, model space, which means your dimensions are related to the actual size of the object, which may or may not be very visible. But this is a little beyond this course. This is a simple intro. We'll go into it a little bit more when we go into Inventor. We're going to dimension in model space, even though that's not necessarily, since it's our first introduction, the best way to do it. All right, going into AutoCAD, like always, there's something for you to draw. It's going to be that thing that you draw, and then we'll add dimensions to it. And of course, I'm going to want to see the 3 views. I'm going to want to see your basic construction lines, at least the ones that block it out. There's the different dimensioning tools that are on the dimensioning palette in AutoCAD. Linear dimensions. Now we're going to do everything in linear. We're seldom going to do align dimensions. There's hardly any reason for us to do line dimensions. Remember, we talked about the rules of when you do a radius or when you do a diameter. We won't really have much use for angular dimensions on the most part. There's your center mark. So a lot of tools available to you. When you go, the way that you control the size of your dimensions is in what's called Dimension Style Manager. I don't think he's going to have you create your new one. He'll just have you edit the standard one. And when you call up the Dimension Manager, that's what it looks like. And it shows you some dimensions, what they're basically going to look like relative to your object. We've talked about in the other lectures your dimension text, your extension line, and your dimension line. One of the rules is, with the possible exception of angles, none of our dimensions go inside the object. We keep them outside. And here I would argue that this one would be an exception to the rule because it's an angle on the inside. That's the simplest way to show that. So he'll show you how to modify your dimensions. We're going to use what's the ASME, American Society of Mechanical Engineering standard, not the ISO. The ISO is different. One of the differences is AMSE is like we have here. the text goes between the dimension lines, not on top of them. But the way you do a dimension is you do your linear, hit your linear tool, you snap the first corner, you snap the second corner, and then you drag it out to how far you want to. So you kind of need to think about beforehand. Remember, there's rules about what can cross and what don't cross. Here's another one. He showed an angle here. That's your angle tool. I'll show you how to use that. Again, sometimes AutoCAD will default when you first put a dimension to inside the object. You have to pull it out. I will count off for dimensions inside the object. Never dimension, except in rare cases, never dimension hidden lines. So that's what your dimensions ought to look like. He's also going to show you how to add a note. Rounds and fillets, which are typical. Again, he's picked objects for us to draw that are of size that our normal dimension size will look appropriate. But in many cases, that's not the case. And we dimension in paper space. But right now, that's kind of beyond what we're doing. Just remember, this class is just a bare bones introduction so that you can begin to learn the tools as you go through other courses. We can add special characters to those notes. You just put the code in your dimension box and it'll translate like your dimension symbol, your degree symbol, plus and minus, and there's a whole list of those. So anyway, he'll walk you through and show you how to use AutoCAD to make the dimensions, but you're still responsible for doing them according to the rules we covered in the other lectures. Have any questions, shoot me an email.